Hello everybody and welcome to another hobby cheating video, and today we're going to talk about glowing eyes. And because eyes are so small, we need to start out with a visual reference to help us out. So I drew two little outlines of eyeballs here, and we're going to kind of use these, and then we're going to go to a real model. But when we talk about glowing eyes, we're usually talking about, we have a character that, or a model that usually maybe they're magical, or maybe they have lenses on or something like that, like, you know, night glow lenses, or that's not what they're called, but you get what I mean. And the most important part before we get into how to actually paint it is to really understand a couple basics about the premise of glow effects, of light effects you're trying to simulate. So glowing eyes are sort of a subsection of OSL, and we'll talk about other OSL in a later video. But for now, I want to focus on just the eye part. So when we look at glowing eyes, when we look at anything that's glowing, that's creating light, but especially in the case of eyes, what we need to create is both our light and our shadow. And the eyeball is a naturally rounded surface. And so if this thing is going to project in some way, then it's projecting out toward you. Right? So you have to think about the angles of where it's hitting. So if this is to be the outline of the eye, the very center of it should be the hottest. Okay, so where I have hot here in the middle, that should be your point of light or something like that. You can make this slightly off-center if you want to create the illusion that the model is looking somewhere, but then you need to off-center both eyes. Around that should be where I have all the M's. That's all the mid-tone. Okay, so this is our hottest, which is usually defined as including the most white. In the end, light is defined on miniatures by the inclusion of white in some way or another. That's a simple rule. It's not always true, but it's going to be the case for this. So the emission of light is going to be white mixed into the whatever color we have at the highest percentage. Out here we get our midtone on the edge of the eye, sort of encircling it. And then all around the eye, we have to have a spot of dark. When I see people screw up glowing eyes, this is always the step they miss. It needs to get darker around the edge of the eye because there's a recess. And that, it's true, by the way, even with lenses or recessed things like Space Marine eyes. The glow comes from contrast. And contrast comes from the inclusion of light and dark very close to each other. So having an outline that is very dark in tone is how you set off the glow. And then around that, you're going to have a smooth area of feathered out mid-tone. Okay? So, hottest to mid to dark to mid again. Or if you prefer, 1, 2, 3, 2. Okay? Now, the second thing we'll say about glowing eyes is that you need to think very carefully about the color the eyes are glowing versus the thing, the sort of the flesh around it or the armor around it or whatever. Certain colors just don't reflect other colors. So if you have green glowing eyes, they're not going to reflect if the armor's blood red. Red doesn't reflect green. Colors don't reflect their exact contrasting colors. If you shine a pure green light at pure red, it will not reflect because red absorbs green. That's why it looks red to your eyes. So what you want to think about is both what are the two colors you're using in combination, and you want to make sure that whatever you're doing with your eye is going to be brighter than the skin around it to some degree. Or at least will pop in contrast. If you have normal flesh tone, blue is often a good choice. You see a lot of blue eyes. What we're going to do today is going to use blue. I'm going to use some Huldra blue and Amarth blue from Scale 75 Fantasy Games line, as well as some good old war colors, white and black. So the point being is that you need to think about how they combine. So for example, if you have red skin, okay, and you do orange glowing eyes, that may be perfectly fine and viable, but they're not really going to pop because in the end, they're going to drift very close to the color of all your highlights. The eyes, if you want them to draw the attention, have to be a sort of very bright color in contrast to the rest of the miniature. So we're going to use this little sample eye here to do a little working test in large scale so you can see what this looks like. And I'm actually going to start. Now, normally on a miniature, we would probably start by getting the whole thing kind of black. But since I don't have that, since I don't, and that's because you don't have you need a smaller space when you're working on a miniature. So you just kind of painting the thing black is easier than trying to create a circle like this. But here I can do that. So this is simply my Huldra blue, my second darkest color mixed with a little black. And I'm going to go a little bit more almost pure black. Still a little too much blue in that. And here in these inner areas, I'm going to trace that black a little thicker. The inner part of the eye is going to be more heavily shadowed because there's still going to be, if you picture this as somebody's, you know, whatever this would be, left eye. Their nose is right here, right? Like this is the nose and stuff right here, and there's an eyebrow up here, right? So this part is going to be naturally the most recessed, okay? From there, we're going to start stepping up. So I'm going to go into my blue, mix it with a little bit of my lighter. Sorry, I'm going to go into a 50-50 of my two blues here, effectively. And then I'm going to start carrying that in. Then I'm going to go into my straight blue. Now, obviously, on paper, this is going to work a little different than if I was on the miniature. So now we've got a nice blue to it. And then I'm just going to start working in my white. And the key is you want that center to start being the hottest, right? Because having this hot center to it is what's going to make the illusion that there's a glow effect, and having the dark around it creates the contrast. Okay? Now, it's easy in this bigger scale because things like blending become very simple, especially with the watercolors in the scale 75, because they're gel, they stay wet even on this paper, so I can just keep voiding my brush and blending this out, because that's another thing. You want it to be fairly smooth. Now, that really only ever matters if you're doing a very large scale miniature. On a 28 millimeter miniature, you're never going to need to worry about this kind of thing. So now I've got a nice hot center to the eye. Clean out my brush, go back into my midtone, which is basically a 50-50 mix of my two main colors. And by the way, these two blues I'm using, this little 4-color combo, you can kind of do this whole thing with just 3 colors, basically whatever the glow is, white and black. But in this case, I'm going to be... Then we just kind of want to, we feather out that effect, which is a very tough thing to do on paper, but you get the idea. You don't want an abrupt edge to your glow effect. You know, light is going to become naturally diffuse as it spreads out. Very tough to do on paper because paper absorbs paint pretty quickly. But in general, I hope you get the idea. We're just kind of spreading it out. We would hit the high points and stuff like that. On the model, it would stay wet longer because it wouldn't soak into paper, and we could just feather it out. And there you go. You can see how we've created that glowing effect, right? Notice how much work that dark is doing. And if I wanted to be really, you know, careful about this, obviously I would get in there and I'd probably smooth this out a little bit. You know, soften that up a little. Something like that, right? The more localized you can make that glow, the more it's going to translate. So, hot, medium, dark, medium, right? 1, 2, 3, 2. Okay? All right, so now that we have that theory out of the way, let's move this to the side. We'll kind of keep this here in the frame as reference. Okay, so now we're going to put what we learned here into practice on a miniature. So I've got this old wizard who is painted very badly, but he's a nice sorcerer. He'd be a perfect opportunity to do some nice glowing eyes. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to do the same thing we just did, but in a much smaller scale. Okay? So we're going to start by getting a little of that black and a little of that dark blue and getting it flowing pretty well. This can be another great opportunity to use some flow aid. You can see that's about what we're working with there, so it's mostly black. And what I'm going to do is find the eyes and just kind of give them a nice ring right around the edge. Now, if you kind of go a little over, that's okay. If you get the eyeball itself, that's okay. That's why we do this part first. Okay. So now we've got these nice, oops, get back on there. Okay. So we're going to get that, there we go. We want a nice dark ridge in about the shape of the eye. Okay. Now, next up, we're going to get into our mid-tone. So we're going to do a mix of our two blues there. Something about like that. And very carefully now, we're going to try to get just the eyeball itself. And then what we're going to do is just step up and keep increasing the amount of white so we get the hottest area just in the center of the eye. Okay. So now you can see we're getting somewhere. We might want to smooth that out just a little. Darken those edges back down. Very light touches. Okay, there we go. Now remember, we want the dead center of the eye to be the hottest. So we're going to go ahead and get almost pure white on our brush, and we're going to find a center point and just give it a little dot and a little dot. So now we've got two very bright, hot white points in the middle of these dark circles. Now, for our mid-tone around the eye, just as I did here, you can see that this is kind of weak. It's the same thing. Even though this is the same color, because if we remember our hot, mid, dark, mid, this outer mid is the same color, but it's going to be more of a glaze consistency. We want to be a little, we don't want it to be as strong. Okay? So, we're going to make sure we've got a nice thin glaze, but that we've got the excess paint wiped off because we don't want the paint to be out of control and start running everywhere. Okay? And now what we're going to do is around the edge here, we're just going to glaze in some light blue. We'll get some up on the ridge of the nose. And that's the key. The glaze is the key. Because if it's too strong, it'll just look like he's got a ring of eye makeup on. You want it to smooth out into the flesh. You can actually feather it out there a little. Okay. So now what you get is something like that. Now, what I would probably do next is take my skin tone, and if I wanted to make sure it was nice and smooth, I would take my skin tone and I would make sure that I have a nice thin glaze of the skin tone, and I would kind of meet it from the other direction. So just like we do if you watch the video on tattoos, after we kind of create it, we go back and we get a little thin glaze. It's the same thing here. I'm going to take a little of my skin glaze and just kind of run it over the edge to make sure I have a nice, smooth transition. Now, if you don't feel like the line in between the eye and the rim is dark enough, you can always go back in extremely carefully, grab some more of your dark blue black, get it flowing nice and well. And we can kind of reinforce some of those shadows. Notice my wrists are locked together here because we want to be very precise with what we're doing. So we're going to just around on the inside. We're going to deepen those shadows down. All right? So now we really get that effect. If I want to build up that glaze a little more, make the eyes look a little brighter. You know, how bright the eyes look is going to largely be dependent on your glazes. And again, it's not about the amount of paint, okay? You always want the paint to be rather thin, rather glaze-like. You want to catch those high points, like the ridge of the nose, the tip of the cheekbone, where the light would reflect out to. If the eye were to become a flashlight, which is what you're doing with this effect, what part of the face would catch the light? That's the question we need to answer. Okay? So there we go. And it's just that easy. And now suddenly our wizard has some nice glowing eyes. That again, we can always go back to the flesh, mix it in, smooth it out if we want. There's a lot, you know, you can kind of play with this as much as you want back and forth. But the keys are, obviously, just to repeat, hottest point needs to be in the center. You can see how we've got our white dot. Then we go to a mid, which is around the rest of the eye, to a very dark circle, ringing the eye, out to a glazed mid-tone surrounding the eye. Okay? On this miniature, if I were going to do this glowing eye effect, I would have the staff up here glowing in the same color and the fingertips here glowing in the same color. Maybe that'll be a future OSL so we can show how to carry that all out. That way the blue doesn't look too striking. The advantage to having the face use this effect is that human beings are naturally trained to look at faces. It's the first thing we look at when we meet other people and when we look at miniatures. So when we do an effect like glowing eyes and create a bright pop color on the center of the face, it not only adds visual interest, but it makes sure that somebody really notices the piece. It's going to mean that something interesting is catching their eye right away when they look at it. Okay? Obviously, it also makes the piece look more strange, more alien, more magical. All of that's an advantage. It can also be a way to balance colors out. If I wanted to have some blue on this miniature, but I didn't have quite enough places to put it, adding some blue glowing eyes can be a nice, say, third point of the color. Okay? So there you go. That's how you do glowing eyes. Relatively simple concept in execution. The toughest part, to be completely honest, is the glazing of the skin around. You want to stay nice and thin with how you apply it, and you want to have some flesh tone on hand to kind of blend back over the edge. If you go thick with your paint, what you're going to end up with is somebody who looks like they're wearing eye makeup, like a raccoon in eye makeup, basically, and that's not what you want. So, there you go. I'll include a little picture of this guy at the end. Hope you like the technique. Hope you find this useful. Give it a like if you did. Subscribe for more hobby cheating in the future. Share this with someone if you think they'd like the technique. Sharing is always the nicest thing you can do. And as always, appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.